Jake, you never responded to the challenge. You publicly stated that I use cocaine. I do not. I believe that you're a cheater, and I believe that you use steroids. And that thing that you came out with today, nobody on earth thinks that you really wrote that. You're too stupid. And for those of you that don't know, if you've ever watched one of his fights and you see when they do the stare down, the guy that's standing in the middle with the Warlock nose and the big Warlock wart on his face, apparently that's his manager. And that guy used to be an accountant for me. And let's just say this, he no longer works for me, and I think he's a scumbag. But if you two think that you can do it better than we do, we're doing this whole thing wrong, you could treat the fighters better than we do, knock yourself out. Go start your own business. It's easy to do. Get the Warlock on it. The Warlock can get it started for you. The Warlock can get it started for you.
The Warlock can get it started for you.
The Warlock can get it started for you.
The Warlock can get it started for you.
Man, this whole Jake Paul versus Dana White saga is getting more and more interesting by the day. So by now you've all heard about Jake's offer to Dana White to come to the UFC, which clearly Dana was never going to accept in the first place. But one fascinating detail to come out of this whole charade is Jake's manager Nakisa Bidarian. So why is this guy so relevant? Well, let me set the stage here. Now, it's interesting because it's clear that by this stage in Jake's career, not only are people starting to take him more and more seriously as a professional boxer, though he still has a long way to go, but now people need to start respecting him as a fight promoter and business owner. Think about that for a second. So Jake Paul went from an annoying YouTuber who was just one other notable face in the celebrity boxing circus.
Hey, check.
Whoa! Come in!
What these ladies are doing, I want to, give them a round of applause because they're doing what most people in boxing aren't doing. The pound for pound two best going at it. This is what boxing needs more of, whether it's male or female.
To now a legitimate boxing star who has a chance to make a global impact on not just boxing, but all of combat sports in general. The guy that refers to himself as the problem child can now ironically be part of the solution. Jake's using his platform to raise awareness about the lack of UFC fighter pay and revenue sharing, as well as health insurance coverage. He's also bringing women's boxing more to the forefront with his promotion of world champion Amanda Serrano. He's awakening the boxing promoters to the massive rewards and payoffs that putting on celebrity fights can bring. He's also exposing an entirely new generation of kids to the world of combat sports who may have otherwise never discovered it. And lastly, he's waging verbal judo on Dana White in an effort to draw out some of the UFC's biggest stars for potential crossover fights. But in order for Jake to become boxing's new savior and change the world of combat sports forever, he can't do it alone. He needs a calculating and intelligent business partner with inside experience with the UFC, boxing, and even Dana White himself to help change the game. Enter Nakisa Bidarian, or as I like to refer to him as, Jake's secret weapon. If you want to know more about the Warlock and how he's helping Jake flip the entire combat sports world on its head, then stick around. Real quick, this is Kiwi MMA, and if you're new here and enjoy combat sports breakdowns, especially more unconventional fighters and matchups like YouTube boxers, then please subscribe to the channel below, and let me know in the comments what you think of Jake's manager and how he's helping Jake out here. And without further ado, let's get right into the video. So for starters, Nakisa Bidarian, no surprise, checks off all the boxes you'd guess for a business mastermind. A graduate from prestigious business schools with degrees in both financial economics and a master's in business administration, his professional experience starts as a financial consultant at a Fortune 500 company called Accutenture, but things get interesting when he nabs a job as an investment banker. Now this is an important career move for Nakisa because investment banking later becomes his main specialty. Now I'm not going to bore you guys with a lot of overly complex business theory here, but this stuff is important to help lay the foundation as to why Nakisa is so valuable to Jake, so just bear with me here. So investment bankers are basically just risk-taking middlemen that bridge together large companies or governments with prospective investors. For example, let's say company X wants to raise capital to, say, fund a new project, or let's say they plan to do this by taking their company public on the stock exchange. In the latter example, this would allow investors to buy pieces of their company, which in turn raises capital for the company. On the other hand, you have potential investors who want to make money as well by investing in these businesses so that they can acquire stocks in the companies that will, hopefully someday, give them back good returns in the future. So through a process called underwriting, investment bankers buy securities, which are basically just tradable assets like stocks or bonds from these companies, and then they sell them to investors for a fee. It's a win-win for all parties involved because A, the company gets to sell their securities off to investors, which in turn raises money for the company. B, the investors get a piece of the company that will, hopefully, provide them great financial returns in the future. And C, the investment bankers make money by selling the securities to the investors. But why don't both parties involved just not go through the investment banker, save money, and make the deal themselves directly? Well, the reason is because the investment banker's job is to administer the securities. Right? It's their job to go out and find quality investors, and if they don't find anyone, they have to keep those securities. This could work great if you're investing in the next Apple or Facebook and you're able to find investors quickly, but let's say the company you bought securities from isn't well received by the investors. Well, tough luck. The investment banker has to keep those crappy securities, which can be a huge financial strain not only on them, but on the banks they represent. In short, investment bankers absorb all the risk involved between companies and investors, and that's why people are willing to pay them large sums of money to take on that risk. It's a perilous game investment bankers play. They take massive risks dealing with huge companies or high-risk startups, but if everything pans out, they can make massive money on the fees they charge. So why am I telling you guys all this stuff anyways? Well, it's because this is exactly the type of stuff Nakisa likely was doing at his time at both Citigroup and Morgan Stanley Bank. Nakisa would have been responsible for working with business clients and trying to find them investors, and he would have been the risk-taking middleman in this case. In addition, at his time with Citigroup, it states he got involved in what's called mergers and acquisitions. A merger is where two firms combine with each other, and an acquisition is where one company purchases another outright. In this case, Nakisa was the one advising companies looking to sell their businesses outright or looking to buy another company. He was responsible for facilitating these complicated business dealings between two other companies. Inevitably, mergers and acquisitions would end up becoming his main business specialty. So that's a crash course on Nakisa's business credentials, so to speak, and he would use this experience to nab a job as an investment banker for Morgan Stanley in the United States Emirates. Little did Nakisa know that taking this opportunity to work in the Middle East would actually end up leading to a job with the UFC. Now this is where things get interesting. Nakisa must have been one hell of an investment banker, because after a little more than a year at Morgan Stanley in the United States Emirates, he lands a massive role as Senior Vice President of Acquisitions at Mubadala Investment Company. Now, what is Mubadala Investment Company? So for starters, it's a sovereign investment fund, meaning its whole sole purpose is to make money for the government. In this case, the city of Abu Dhabi. According to its LinkedIn page, its whole purpose is to, quote, manage a diverse portfolio of assets and investments in the United States Emirates and abroad to generate substantial financial returns for its shareholder, the government of Abu Dhabi. Given Nakisa's background in investment banking, especially in mergers and acquisitions, remember this is facilitating business deals where companies either merge or combine with each other, or one company buys the other outright, it makes sense that Nakisa was made head of acquisitions. In an article by Canadian Business, Nakisa states that he spent 4 years there and was also responsible for international real estate and hospitality investments, and it's likely, given his specialty in mergers and acquisitions, Nakisa was facilitating huge deals from Mubadala and buying out and combining with other hotel chains worldwide. And this is how Nakisa inevitably made a connection with the UFC. He started working with a lot of different hotel companies in Abu Dhabi and abroad, and he started to become exposed to both the UFC and casino gaming. I didn't have any exposure with the UFC, he'd later go on to say, but I had a lot of exposure through my time with hotels and gaming. Now, around the same time Nakisa was getting exposed to MMA and the casino world, Flash Entertainment, the leading Middle Eastern entertainment company, made a 10% investment in the UFC in 2010. Now, this business deal with Flash Entertainment was a mutual partnership with the UFC used to foster their brand in the Middle East by putting on large pay-per-view events such as UFC 112. And with Nakisa's increased exposure and interest in the UFC, real estate, and casino gaming, as well as the connection and notoriety he had attained with Mubadala, it was the perfect time to reach out to then UFC co-owners Lorenzo and Frank Fertitta, two huge players in the Las Vegas gaming scene who were now trying to promote the UFC brand in Abu Dhabi. And just for anyone who's new here to all this, the Fertitta Brothers, in this case Lorenzo and Frank, were the founders of Zuffa, which is the parent company of the UFC. They're also executives at Stations Casino, one of the biggest casino companies in Las Vegas. So this was a massive opportunity for Nakisa to connect with not only two of the biggest players in combat sports entertainment, but also casino gaming, and apparently their initial encounter went pretty well. I fell in love with them probably from the first time I met them in terms of the businessmen that they were, and the ethics that they had, and the moral kind of compass that they operated their businesses with. So very quickly I said, these are the kind of guys I want to work with if I make the move back to North America. Fortunately, the feeling was mutual. With the relationship going well, Nakisa is offered a job as Senior Vice President of Investment and Strategy at Fertitta Entertainment, a massive holding company that houses companies for the Fertitta Brothers' cousin, Tillman Fertitta. Tillman is most known as the owner of the Houston Rockets, as well as a bunch of restaurants, hotels, and casinos. While there's not much I could find from his time at the company, it must have gone quite well, because in a little over 2 years later, he's offered a similar position as Executive Vice President of Strategy and Business Ventures at the UFC. Nakisa later stated upon joining the company, "My eventual path to the UFC was not one that was calculated, but more based on a relationship that I had built with the previous owners of the UFC, Frank and Lorenzo Fertitta. I got to know them through my time in Abu Dhabi, on the casino side of their businesses, and eventually joined them to work at the management company of Station Casinos. Based on my skill set and background, the Fertitta Brothers offered me an opportunity to work at the UFC back in 2012, which I was thrilled to take." But he had to earn that job by proving himself at Fertitta Entertainment first, and it was only by earning that level of trust with the Fertitta Brothers that Nakisa got the opportunity to work at the UFC. And it would appear, based on the UFC's website and Lorenzo himself, that Nakisa once again did a stellar job there. In an interview at a business conference back in 2015, Nakisa talks about his role at the UFC.
Nakisa, tell us a little bit about your day-to-day.
Sure. My role at the UFC is focused on corporate development, strategic planning, research, analytics, consumer insights, and overall strategy. So what all that really means is I don't focus on the day-to-day activities. I don't get involved in event operations. My team and I are looking at really what we need to do to stay ahead of the sports sector, the entertainment sector, the media sector, and how we can be well positioned 5-10 years from now.
One notable venture Nakisa would help develop was UFC Gym, the world leader in MMA-inspired fitness. As a brick-and-mortar platform, UFC fans could integrate their love for mixed martial arts with a regular fitness program. Fans could do this by going to official UFC Gym locations or accessing virtual workouts online. In addition, the UFC website stated that, under Nakisa's leadership, the UFC made significant strides in improving internal processes to improve its operating model. It's also interesting to note that during this time in 2013, the UFC launched UFC Fight Pass, an online fight library and archive for hardcore fans. While I can't prove that Nakisa spearheaded this project, given his job description, I can't help but think that he likely had his hand in it. And lastly, in 2015, Nakisa led the unveiling of UFC's historic athlete outfitting policy, featuring a multi-year deal with Reebok. This deal mandated that Reebok would be responsible for creating unique and iconic apparel for all fighters in their corners, with the goal of elevating the visual identity of UFC events. The UFC policy also mandated specific clothing standards that UFC fighters were required to meet during weigh-ins, walkouts, and for the fight itself. And with the further success of the UFC, from the Fox partnership to the Conor McGregor and Ronda Rousey eras ushering in to further international expansion, and with Nakisa being a part of this success, yet another job promotion was on the table, but this time an even bigger one. In a 2015 announcement, Lorenzo Fertitta would state, "Nakisa has been a key contributor to the UFC's success throughout the last 4 years since he joined the organization. His diverse finance and strategy experience, coupled with the impact he's had on the organization, makes him an ideal candidate for the CFO position." Now, we want to clarify what a CFO is because Dana White incredibly undersold Bidarian's position here.
You want to talk shit about my manager, who is the CFO of your company that helped you sell it to Endeavor, $4 billion?
Guy that's standing in the middle, apparently that's his manager. And that guy used to be an accountant for me. And that guy used to be an accountant for me. And that guy used to be an accountant for me.
He wasn't an accountant, or a CPA as it's called. A CPA helps minimize tax burden, an important essential role to every business. But a CFO is the top financial position in any organization. They're the ones responsible for long-term financial planning and strategy by, say, forecasting, budgeting, and resolving cash flow issues. A CPA is concerned with tax planning in the event your company gets audited, but a CFO is the top money man responsible for the overall financial direction, strategy, and success of the company. So, no, Nakisa was not just an accountant. He was the UFC's top money man, which is crazy to think about. And as a financial wizard who's executed over $32 billion in mergers and acquisition transactions, according to his LinkedIn, as well as his relationship with the Fertitta Brothers, it's no surprise he found himself in this position. Interestingly enough, Nakisa described his relationship with Dana at the onset of this promotion, and it seemed quite cordial. He is extremely knowledgeable in the fight business, very insightful in what the fans want to consume, and I think my favorite thing about Dana is that he's direct and to the point, so you know where he stands, you know what his thought process is, and he's open to suggestions.
And let's just say this, he no longer works for me, and I think he's a scumbag.
Yeah, Dana sure knows where he stands with people, alright. But now we get to the root cause of the dissension between Dana White and Bidarian, because think about it. How did this relationship between the two of them start to disintegrate? Well, two main reasons in particular. The first potential reason is that Nakisa had a bizarre altercation with a former UFC employee, Don Gold, during a pickup basketball game. Now, Don Gold is the former UFC executive of entertainment who, similar to Nakisa, oversaw the direction and progression of promoting the UFC brand through various entertainment platforms. This involved a partnership with THQ to produce the UFC video game, Netflix streaming, as well as toy deals. And Don Gold's biggest brainchild was...
I want more. I want more out of you. Keep going. Keep jumping. Non-stop. I want those knees up. I want your heart rate through the roof. I want those lungs burning hot fire right now.
Yeah, UFC Fit. A UFC-inspired home workout program. Yeah, that's all I'm going to say about that. Not the greatest business move in my opinion. But the point is, Don Gold had a similar position to Nakisa in that he was overseeing the direction and progress of the UFC brand in the entertainment industry, which Nakisa, in many respects, had a similar position before being promoted to CFO. So perhaps there's similar backgrounds with the company, one promoting UFC Fit, a home workout brand, whereas the other guy was promoting UFC Gym, a brick and mortar business you leave your house to go to, may have led to the personal rivalry. So Gold files a complaint against Bidarian to the District Court of Clark County, Nevada, claiming that during a game of basketball, Bidarian became upset when he mistakenly believed he'd been fouled by Gold. According to Gold, in front of multiple witnesses, Bidarian picked up a basketball and threw it intentionally and with malice directly at the backside of Gold's head. Now, Gold alleges that as a result of this action by Bidarian, he suffered permanent injury to his right ear, which caused him to experience permanent hearing loss. He also had medical expenses and claimed loss of income, and as a result, demanded that Nakisa pay some of the damages. Now, Nakisa's side of the story is that it was in fact himself who was attacked by Gold during the basketball game. He claims that after Gold violently fouled him with an elbow to the body, Bidarian threw a basketball which inadvertently struck Gold. Allegedly, Gold then charged Bidarian and began striking him with his fist. According to Bidarian, no less than 4 individuals restrained Gold, and that even after this incident, both parties continued to play basketball. It gets even more crazy when Bidarian alleges that Gold's motives for filing the complaint had nothing to do with what had happened on the basketball court, implying that Gold's motives were because he, quote-unquote, harbored professional jealousy against Bidarian due to his employment status at the UFC. Now, Gold was still with the UFC in 2014 when this happened, but was relieved of his duties in 2015, and given their similar job titles at the time, Nakisa seemed to imply that it was only after Gold was relieved of his duties that he then filed suit against Bidarian. So that's one angle on this story, being that maybe Dana White, who seemed to be pretty loyal to Gold throughout his history, maybe had a bad taste in his mouth about Bidarian as a result of this altercation. I mean, Gold had been with the company since 2001, and he was also a guy that Dana called multiple times a week after his wife had passed away, and they were pretty close. However, while this may have played a part and gives us an interesting story about Nakisa's history, it would be one of the biggest sports deals in history that led to Dana and Nakisa's falling out. So Nakisa was made CFO of the UFC from January 2016 and only held the position until December of 2016. So he only stayed there for about 11 months. Now, typically when you appoint someone as CFO, especially with the credentials of Bidarian, you figured they'll likely stick around for some time and become an integral part of the organization for years to come. For example, Don Gold, whom we spoke of earlier, stayed on with the company for more than 10 years, so it's a little weird for a CFO to leave within a year. However, it makes sense when we consider the role Nakisa played as CFO. So a little background. In 2016, the UFC was sold for $4 billion to, at the time, WME-IGM, but now known as Endeavor, a giant holding company. Now, this was a huge deal because when the Fertitta Brothers and Dana White bought the UFC in 2001, they bought it for a little over $2 million. Right? The amount of profits they were netting in this deal was insane, and at the time, this deal marked the biggest sports acquisition in history. It also seemed like a win-win at the time, with Lorenzo stating that Endeavor shared the same vision for the UFC, Dana was still going to stay on as president, and the only catch being that Lorenzo, who prior to the deal owned about 40% share in the company, would be stepping down as CEO. In essence, while he was grateful for the relationship he had with Endeavor and happy with how the company ended up, in the end he was taking his money and going home. Oh, and by the way, take a wild guess who led the Endeavor deal.
The CFO of your company that helped you sell it to Endeavor, $4 billion?
$4 billion? $4 billion?
You guessed it, our friend Nakisa again. Remember how we talked about his background in investment banking, his skill set as the risk-taking middleman whose job it was to find investors for startups and massive corporations, or perhaps his specialty in mergers and acquisitions? Well, all these skills came in handy again because Nakisa was actually the one who brought forth the deal of the UFC to Endeavor, meaning he would have been the key player responsible for facilitating the deal. In one article I found, it states that Bidarian led the conceptualization, negotiation, and execution of the sale of the UFC, meaning the sale was essentially Nakisa's brainchild. Now it seems like happy days for everyone now. The UFC has been sold, all parties involved benefit, except there's one issue. Lorenzo and Frank were leaving, and they planned on taking their money and starting their own private family investment firm. This was so that they could take their share of $4 billion and turn it into even more money for years to come. So Nakisa had a choice here. Would he cut ties with Lorenzo and stay with Dana White in the UFC and continue on as mixed martial arts' most influential money man? Or would his long-term bond with the Fertitta Brothers continue on and he would get on board with their private investment firm? Well, if I know anything about human nature, it's that people gravitate towards what's familiar and loyalty is everything. So in December of 2016, a month shy of his year anniversary with the UFC, Nakisa left the UFC, and in May of 2016, he co-founded Fertitta Capital alongside Sam, I'm not even going to try to pronounce his last name, and Lorenzo Fertitta. Nakisa was not only chairman and co-founder, but now CEO. He wasn't just the top money man this time, he was the top executive in the company and the head don of all managerial decisions. Now, we all know Dana's side of the story on this, as he thinks Nakisa is a total scumbag, and I guess I can see why. Dana has touted loyalty as much as any business leader out there, so for Nakisa to lead and facilitate the sale of the UFC to Endeavor, only to turn around months later and leave to join the Fertitta Brothers company, I could see how Dana would view this as a stab in the back. Personally, I don't think Nakisa did anything wrong here. His relationship and history with the Fertitta Brothers is always going to be stronger than his rapport with Dana White, so it makes sense he would follow them to another company when he sees an opportunity. We won't get too much into Nakisa's time at Fertitta Capital, just know that he spent almost 3 years there and executed plenty of profitable deals until it closed in June of 2019. But with the closing of Fertitta Capital, Nakisa had a huge void to fill here, because he still had a serious interest in combat sports, but instead of just working for another promotion, Nakisa had a longer-term vision of spearheading a new combat sports promotional trend and looked no further than his interest in the YouTube and celebrity boxing scene. Now, if you want an inside perspective of Nakisa's mindset and interest in celebrity boxing, then I highly recommend you read this article from sportsbusinessjournal.com, which came out just 3 days before Jake Paul was scheduled to fight Ann Edsom Gibb. Coincidence? I think not. Here, Nakisa started to take notice of the YouTube celebrity boxing scene and realized that there was some serious business opportunity here. So in the article, Nakisa details how advances in digital technology have led to a new landscape of media distribution in both sports and streaming services, such as DAZN, ESPN Plus, and UFC Fight Pass, and on social media channels such as YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. So let's break down what he means here. What Nakisa is saying is twofold. Number one, streaming services like ESPN Plus, DAZN, and others are revolutionizing sports consumption because they're bypassing traditional distributors of sports content, such as cable, broadcast, or satellite television platforms, in place of a direct-to-viewer media service via the internet. So instead of having to buy DirecTV or Dish to watch the UFC or boxing, you can just pay for a more affordable monthly streaming service, and all you need is an internet connection to watch. At the same time, social media channels, in many respects, are rapidly replacing television as people's main ways of consuming media. People tend to consume more media, even televised media, through outlets like YouTube or Instagram instead of watching television directly. With these considerations in mind, Nakisa brings up online personalities who are also emerging across these platforms. KSI, the Paul brothers, and many others are revolutionizing traditional star personas, as we'll call it, by promoting themselves as personal brands through social media accounts. Through their brands, these influencers develop what Nakisa calls cultural capital, which leads to new revenue-making opportunities. In other words, it used to be that people idolized famous movie stars and athletes, people who are already widely recognized for their specific skills and talents, but now social media stars are flipping that concept on its head. Through building their personal brand and collecting followers, even in the most ridiculous and absurd ways possible,
Guys, we're in Shibuya. I got my squid leg. I got a fish. Hey guys, you want some fish? Okay.
social media stars are becoming more influential than traditional famous people. In other words, developing an online persona or an exaggerated caricature is more influential these days than being a recognized world star or leader in your respective field. Nakisa even says that these personas lead to people questioning these stars' intelligence levels, but in reality, he sees them as progressive and innovative entrepreneurs running around-the-clock mini production companies. So what is Nakisa's case for more integration of influencers into combat sports? Well, just look at the numbers. This is a chart for famous boxers, people known exclusively for their boxing skills. Of course, they may have developed online personas over time, but those were secondary to their boxing skills and prowess. Now there's one for the legends of the sport, the Pacquiaos, the Mayweathers, the Mike Tysons of the world, and then there's one for the present boxing stars, the Anthony Joshuas, Deontay Wilders, etc. Now, what these charts are measuring is the number of social media followers across all platforms, whether it be YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, etc. Now, as you can see with the chart here, the boxing legends tend to have better numbers, likely due to their longevity and history, whilst the current boxing stars is still fairly respectable, but definitely less. And you can see the biggest stars like Floyd Mayweather can definitely hold their own against some of the YouTube sensations. But when we compare the number of the social media stars overall to both the boxing groups, it's not even close. And besides Floyd Mayweather, all three YouTubers combined outdid their boxing competitors in terms of social media followers. So what is Nakisa's conclusion from all this data? Well, as live sports broadcasting moves more towards direct-to-consumer models, OTT providers, like DAZN and ESPN Plus, need to prioritize creating progressive funnels to attract in new customers who can be converted into subscribers and, eventually, combat sports fans for life. By tapping into influencers' respective audiences, these platforms are attracting new communities of viewers while reducing the cost of customer acquisition and subscriber conversion. So to put it simply, because social media stars have a large organic following through their brands that are already established, OTT providers, instead of trying to build up and promote the next big fighter or trying to further educate people on why boxing is so awesome, can and should just use these guys' massive followings to attract new boxing fans by putting on more and more of these celebrity fights. What Nakisa is saying here echoes the words of Matchroom Boxing president Eddie Hearn when he says, boxing has experienced a golden age right now, and guys like Jake, Logan, and KSI are turning a new global demographic towards boxing and cultivating the next generation of fans. Once these new fans experience the excitement of a live boxing event, it's our job to make sure we keep them hooked with engaging content and a wide range of world-class boxing and combat sports offered on DAZN and other platforms. In other words, let the YouTuber turned boxer be the gateway drug for their subscribers to watch a boxing match, and we'll do the rest in terms of turning them into lifelong fans. Seeing this as an opportunity and a possible trend to be capitalized on, Nakisa goes on to be extremely complimentary to both Jake and Logan in this article, and he recognized their long-term commitment to the sport. It's clear that Nakisa, with his forward-thinking mindset, always had this kind of idea in mind. So with Nakisa's nose for opportunity in mind, he gets busy. In 2019, he starts Bavafa Sports, a sports, media, and talent advisory and investment firm. But this is just a stepping stone, because in 2020, Nakisa gets yet again another opportunity. He becomes the executive producer for Triller Fight Club's debut premiere matchup, Tyson vs. Jones. And another caveat, Bidarian was actually the one who facilitated the deal to have Nate Robinson fight Jake, according to this article right here. Now, as far as how the actual card went, it's hard not to credit the success of the card on the names involved, being the comeback fight of two of the greatest boxing legends of the past 30 years. However, Nakisa did a fantastic job at the production. From getting Nate Robinson to become the sacrificial lamb to Jake Paul, to the lighting grid being directly above the fighters, perfect for a bout with no fans, to, of course, the musical performances and commentary by none other than Snoop Dogg himself, and all made for a memorable evening of fights. And it showed, with the bout grossing more than $80 million and selling over 1.6 million pay-per-view buys, good for the 9th highest pay-per-view event of all time. This was a major success for Nakisa to play a part in this event, and it soon led to him and Jake's relationship deepening even more. Now, by this point, Nakisa has known Jake since the Gibb fight, and they also were on the same Triller card together, so I'm not exactly sure when he officially started to manage Jake, but it must have been sometime after the Ben Askren bout, because we do know that Bidarian played a huge role in facilitating the signing of Jake over to Showtime. So post-April 2021, Nakisa becomes Jake's official manager and chief advisor. And as I stated before, his first big move is to facilitate Jake's move over to Showtime Sports, a more professional and notable boxing promotion as opposed to Triller. Showtime is the gold standard in terms of boxing promotion, as evidenced by having the biggest star in boxing history, Floyd Mayweather, as one of his fighters for years. And if Jake is looking to angle for a Floyd Mayweather exhibition match, which isn't impossible given that his brother got the opportunity, Showtime isn't a bad place to be at. Being at Showtime also further legitimized Jake as a professional boxer, whereas Triller, with its bizarre matchups and out there promotion, only fueled the idea that Jake is simply a celebrity fighter. This in turn led to Nakisa facilitating the negotiations for the Woodley bouts, which was another huge move in actually getting Jake to fight someone with a legitimate striking skill set on his resume like Tyron Woodley. But then comes the founding of MVP Promotions, Jake and Nakisa's real brainchild. And what exactly were the origins of this? Well, basically Jake approached Bidarian and stated that he was passionate about boxing and was looking to take his boxing skills and brand to the next level. At the time Jake had approached Bidarian, he already had a fan base of about 40 to 50 million fans globally, and this excited Bidarian because he saw it as an opportunity to disrupt a fragmented sport. Remember, this was the opportunity Bidarian had been looking for when he cited in his article about how YouTubers are disrupting combat sports by putting on these fights, and now with Jake as a trusted friend and co-worker, Bidarian can now fully capitalize on this trend he predicted years before, as well as shake up the state of boxing forever. Look, it's pretty clear that boxing at times can be in a stagnant state. The various boxing promotions each have their respective stars, and because each side wants a fair share of the honeypot, it leads to a lot of anticipated matchups that fans have been craving for years being postponed. In addition, there's many notable and skilled fighters, or champions even, who simply lack the McGregor-esque personality and stardom to garner a notable fan base or following, and you'd think that the promoters or managers will be able to market them effectively, but oftentimes this isn't the case, and notable champions, such as Amanda Serrano, Demetrius Andrade, and others, remain under the radar to casual fans. So with the paradigm in mind that Jake and Nakisa want to undo a lot of this bad promoting, they begin by signing Amanda Serrano to MVP Promotions, with the goal in mind to take this world-class boxer and elevating her notoriety by co-headlining her on Jake's cards.
If I can add, from the moment we signed our deal for Jake's last two fights with Showtime, the first call that we had with Steven Espinoza around the fight card, Jake and I quickly identified that it was important to bring exposure to women's boxing. That was the first time Jake had co-control of his fight card. And at that point, we discussed with Steven Amanda Serrano being the person to target. And that's how she made her debut on Jake's first event with Showtime and Most Valuable Promotions.
To put this in perspective, Amanda Serrano is one of the most dominant female boxers of all time, and yet her fan base isn't really anything to write home about. For one of the most skilled boxers of our era, she's only making about $20,000 to $30,000 per fight. But what MVP is doing to change this is taking Jake's unique and widespread fan base and using that to expose boxing fans to fighters who have not gotten their fair share in the public eye.
How do you see, MVP helping Amanda Serrano?
Sure, I think it comes from two angles. One is Jake Paul, his content creation, his marketing platform, his endorsement to his audience. If you look at the awareness of Amanda Serrano, who is a legend in women's boxing, it increased 5-6-fold over the past 3 or 4 months. Of course, that has to do with her performance, but it also has to do with the platform that MVP, Showtime, and Jake provided over this period of time, right? And I think the other part of it that we'll be able to help her with is in negotiating the right deals, getting her the right positions for someone of her stature, whether it's in the ring, whether it's outside the ring, whether it's a brand partnership, consumer products. She should be one of the highest paid female athletes in the world, and we're going to make sure that's the case.
And by co-headlining fighters on Jake's cards, if even just a small percentage of Jake's fan base is converted into boxing fans, or new fans of Amanda, or any other athlete on their promotion, then it's a win-win for all parties involved. And Amanda is benefiting greatly from this new exposure, gaining new fans, and through Nakisa and Jake's negotiation tactics, a Katie Taylor matchup is already on the horizon. Nakisa was the architect of this fight, laying out his plans on how to fight Taylor as early as last year.
Nakisa, welcome to London. A great turnout in New York last week. You've been a big driving force. I have to give yourself and Sean Palmer from Matchroom props for getting this deal papered and done, and all those long conversations before me and Jake just turned up to take all the credit. But it's been great working with you guys. Partnerships going well, all pulling in the same direction to make this event as big as we can.
Absolutely. Look, this all started because of you and Joe when Jake made his debut on DAZN just 2 years ago.
Now, is that something that would be like a main event fight on its own somewhere? Would that be something that is on a Jake Paul undercard? How would that work? Have you guys thought about that yet?
Yeah, I would say that's a pay-per-view headline event, Amanda Serrano versus Katie Taylor, ideally at Madison Square Garden next year.
And I'm going to have to make another video about this in the future, but given Conor McGregor's connection and support of Katie Taylor, it's very likely that putting on Taylor versus Serrano could be the key to link Jake Paul with Conor McGregor in a boxing match someday. Yes, you've heard it here first. If Jake Paul ever ends up fighting Conor McGregor someday, it'll be because of this matchup between Amanda Serrano and Katie Taylor that'll potentially link them forever. Interestingly enough, the Notorious One actually went ahead and followed Nakisa Bidarian on Instagram, which is very interesting. Conor doesn't just follow people needlessly, so to speak. He usually follows people he takes an active interest in. So in short, this is an overview of Nakisa Bidarian and why he's so pivotal for Jake Paul and his boxing empire. The guy is an incredible businessman, able to negotiate and facilitate huge financial deals with his background in mergers and acquisitions. He's a forward-thinking and progressive leader when it comes to innovating the combat sports landscape by investing in celebrity boxers. And most importantly, Jake and him seem to have a really deep relationship. I mean, look at the shout out Jake gave him on Twitter for further evidence of this. The sky's the limit for Jake with Nakisa at his side. And do I think they're going to compete against the UFC someday? Not necessarily, but as Nakisa has indicated himself on his Instagram, that's not really their intention. They're not out to make their own competing MMA promotion, they're just out to shake up what they see as a stagnated state in boxing, as well as capitalize on the social media and celebrity star trend in combat sports that is ongoing. Will this be enough to be able to win over the heart of Dana White? Unlikely, but we'll have to wait and see. But what do you guys think? Leave your thoughts and comments below. And once again, this is Kiwi MMA, over and out.